Anyway, we need to talk about a book from the 17th century that had people burning it after they read the whole thing. Not the beginning, not the middle, but in the end, after you read the whole book, they burned it. Let's get into it. Hello, my intimate intellects. Today we're diving into The School of Venus, or, let's read the whole thing, or The Lady's Delight, reduced to rules of practice, written in 1655. Jesus. And this was during the cooling down period of the witch trials, which is important, but let me finish my statement first. This book is basically the 1655 version of binge watching reality TV, then secretly posting, hey, we're all into drama these days. Let's get into the author, okay? Let's see what I have. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. That's because this book was published anonymously, and for good reason. Although we don't know who wrote the book, there is speculation that it was written by a woman or a group of women with a surprisingly forward-thinking attitude of introducing women into their journey of womanhood, which, if you didn't know, was a big no-no for 1655, especially the church didn't like things like that. It's weird. It's weird. The church wasn't having none of this book. This book is, for 1655, this book is, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's pretty graphic. If you Google this book, two names that pop up, and I'm going to tell you why their names pop up. The first person is Michael Millett. I'm not good with names. Millot. Millett. And Jean Liange. I think that was good. But here's the thing. We know absolutely nothing, and I mean nothing, about these two. We don't know if they were like prominent people at the time and was like, I don't want to ruin my reputation. We know nothing. And we also don't know who translated this book into English. The whole book is a ghost story. Like, everybody from the authors, from who published it, it's all just a mystery. And I'm here for it. I think it gives a whole new type of lore to this book. Now let's get into this drama. Immediately after this book was published, it was banned. I mean, like that, like so quick. Oh, it's gone. It was banned. The book was banned immediately in 1655, the same year it was published. In Paris, Louis Plot, these people had names, man. Plot. Anyway, in Paris, the printer, Louis Plot, had commissioned, was like, let me get 300 copies of this book, and then he had 50 copies written on fancy paper. That's the term for his wealthier book readers. They wanted it on fancy paper. Not sure what fancy paper would be back in that day, but those 50 people wanted those premium books. Within months, the authorities took one look at this and said, oh no, this is extremely scandalous. They was like, we're not having it, and went on a book burning rampage. Every copy they found, they held it in the square and burned, tossing them in. So here's where we're gonna get juicy. Now you remember Jean and Michael. They were editors. They weren't the authors. They were editors of this book. That's the only reason their names pop up when you search this book. We really don't know who wrote it, but those two got caught and they took different approaches. Michael ran. He's like, I'm not finna be arrested. Jean, however, got caught. I'm laughing because I'm gonna tell you what happened to Jean. Shit. Now, poor Jean gets caught, gets locked up. He's fine. They're saying, oh, he got locked up in August, right? He stayed in jail until October. You're saying that's not so bad. No, it is bad because the parliament or the whoever's of in charge in 1655 forgot he was in jail. They went on vacation. I'm not lying. I'm not making this up. Gene stayed in jail because they forgot he was in jail and they went on vacation. And when they came back, they was like, oh snap, man still in, don't text me. This dude's still in jail. Like, whoa, and then he got out. That's funny, but not funny. I can only imagine after the initial raid, none of the unconfiscated books survived. This book became historical contraband. And over the next 200 years, these books spent long times in like abandonment. For the next 200 years, if you wanted to read this, you had to know somebody who knew somebody to get your hands on this book. It was passed around through like the underground network. And if you were caught with this book, you were going to jail. But there were like secret printings and people were running like a Renaissance era book cartel. This wasn't the only book that was ran under there at the time, but I'll get into that later. And the risk of having this book was real. In 1688, England started arresting anyone connected to this book. If you printed it, you were fined. If you sold it, you went to jail. It was just so controversial that people, it was too much. I don't think it was too much for the people. I think it was too much for the church and the government. Because some people were trying to read it. And the ones who were like, oh, I don't want to read it. You know those people who act like they're too classy? Be like, oh, I don't read smut like that. They were reading this book. But I want to get into someone who read this book and they had a very interesting experience with it. And his name is Samuel Pepys. Pepys, P-E-P-Y-S, Pepys. Now, if you don't know who Samuel Pepys is, no, it's not the guy who runs whatever. That was a dumb joke. He is the guy who had a diary that became famous because he read this book. Oh my God, he had such an interesting take on this book. Picture this. It's January 1668. Pepys's casually browsing the bookstore. He spots this French book. He thinks, oh, this might be educational for my wife. Wrong. Oh, he was so wrong. I don't even know the part where he was like, I'm going to give this to my wife. I don't even think that ever happened because he read the book himself. He opened this book up and read it himself. And do you know what he said? He said this was the most dotty, lewd book he's ever saw. And he was ashamed of reading it. What do you think he did with the book after he read it? He read it again. He read it twice. A whole month later, Samuel convinces himself that a sober man needs to read this book. So he read it a month later. I'm assuming he was drunk for a month and then sobered up on the 30th. I don't know. He said a sober man needs to read this book. He skips church. It was a Sunday. Scandalous. I know. He skips church, sits down in his home, wife nowhere to be found because you remember he said he was getting it for his wife, and reads the entire thing in one sitting. Let's say physically aroused as well. I'm not joking. It's in his diary. His diary is public. It's published. You can read this. Now, what do you think he did with the book after he read it sober the second time? He burned it. He said he didn't want anybody to find it and that he was ashamed to have it. Now, he probably read this book more than twice, but we know for sure he read it twice. And we know for sure he liked it the second time. He was so ashamed and he burned the book. I wonder if his wife ever got to read this book. I don't think she did. He said, oh, it's for my wife. I don't think she ever read the book. Okay, now let's get into this book because I am obsessed with this book a little bit. I'm obsessed with this book. I'm gonna have to give you a PG version because Good God. If you want an unfiltered version of this, let me know in the comments. Now, in this book, The School of Venus, there are two main characters. There's Kathy, full name Catherine, and then there's Francis, nicknamed Frank. Don't get it confused. Francis is a girl, okay? Two female cousins, and it's the tale old as time. 16-year-old Kathy is sheltered. Sheltered. Like homeschooled religious encampment sheltered. Actually, no. She makes homeschooled religious encampment kids look worldly. That's how this girl is sheltered beyond sheltered. Like if you had a home with an extra home inside, and inside that home was another home, that's where Kathy lived. I'm saying this for a reason. I gotta set the tone. Frances, however, is not. She lives outside of the third shelter, the outside world. You've seen the trees and the grass and whatever. But anyway, Frances comes to visit her cousin, Kathy. Frances is like, how are the men who've been courting you? What do you think of them? And Kathy's like, I don't like none of them. She's like, this is what she said. She said, I have no more pleasure in their company than I have in my mother's or aunt's. Their ceremonies make me laugh. And then she goes through the whole list of men who gets to visit her. Here's the list of men who come visit her. There's Mr. Clark, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Reynolds, and there's a Mr. Rogers. Take note of Mr. Rogers. She says, oh, everything they do just makes me laugh. I'm not interested in any of them. And then Frances is like, but what about Mr. Rogers? He comes by more than the others. Doesn't he say, And Kathy's like, he comes and pretends that he loves me. Tells me hundreds of things that I understand not. That's what she said. While the other guys are just kind of going through the motion, Mr. Rogers is trying to make a connection. At least that's what I think. The conversation goes on, and somehow it lands on the topic of intimacy. And this is where we learn that Miss Kathy knows nothing about the birds and the bees. Solar eclipse. Full-blown bag over the head, nothing. Kathy doesn't know what male anatomy is. She doesn't know what female anatomy is. Okay, she doesn't know what it's called. She doesn't know anything about intimacy. She doesn't know why people have relations. She doesn't know who can have relations. She knows nothing of the birds and the bees. Let's just leave it at that. And Frank's like, girl, what? So Frank is like, okay, I'm gonna tell you everything. Frank goes into exceedingly excruciating detail. Frank basically has to be a physicist teaching quantum physics to a preschooler. I don't know how else to put it. How much detail do you want to know Frank went into? Frank tells Kathy, men have wieners. And Kathy's like, what's that? Frances, bless her heart. Frances tells her, Frank goes to fully and vividly describe male anatomy. She gets specific. She explaining size, shape, what happens during arousal, how long it takes, what different sensations mean. And Kathy's asking questions like, what does that do? And why does that do that? And Frank answers everything with the patience of a saint, but the thoroughness of a medical book. She leaves nothing out. Nothing. Woo! But here's what really gets me. Frank doesn't just explain mechanics. She explains the pleasure aspect. She tells Kathy the importance of foreplay, about timing, about communication. She literally explains everything, what pleasure means. And for this book to be written in 1655, we know how it is written today in the year 2025. So 1655, for this to be written then is insane. It's insane. It's insane. It's a really good book. Frank explains to her what pleasure is and why it's important to be with a man who wants you to feel the same thing that he does during the horizontal tango. And Kathy's like, what? Frank doesn't back down. She is a better educator to me than people are today. Frank breaks down female anatomy as well, explaining everything, what everything is called, what works together, why that's good, why that's not good. And she gives Kathy a roadmap of her own body. She's like, girl, you need to know yourself. You need to get to know you. And then Frank gets into the actual act itself of knowing yourself. And I'm going to leave that one at that. And honestly, I appreciate Frank for being such a thorough teacher. Like, in 2025, people are still getting, like, intimacy education off of Google, and they're hoping for the best. But Frank, detail and shame-free advice in 1655. She's covering topics that some people today would even be embarrassed to talk about. It is a wonder. It's a wonder. It's a good book. Keep saying that. The conversation goes on, and Kathy's like, oh, dear cousin, I want to experience this pleasure you're talking about. But Kathy also has no clue who can do it. Remember Mr. Rogers? Remember Mr. Rogers? They're at Kathy's house, right? Kathy's parents aren't there. Kathy's like, I need to experience this thing you just told me about. Frank's like, all right, I'm gonna go get Mr. Rogers. Oh my God. Now, before I get to the next part, I want to talk about something that threw me for a loop. Remember when I said Kathy's like, who can do this thing together? Frank's like, anybody. Now, Frank tells Kathy, hey, you remember that time your mom kicked your dad out the house? And Kathy's like, yeah. He's like, oh, because he was having an affair with the maid. Frank used that as an example as to who can do the horizontal tango. She's like, oh, anybody. You remember that time your mom kicked your dad? Kathy had no clue that was the reason he got kicked out. Kathy, you live in the house. Francis doesn't even live in the house. And I was like, girl, how do you know? I was like, girl, how do you know why her dad got kicked out the house, but not Kathy? It was insane. Anyway, Francis runs and goes get Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers shows back up to the house with Kathy, and that's where I'm gonna leave you. You know why? Because reading is fundamental. Yes, it is. Look, this book is, even for today's standard, this book is graphic. And like I said, I'm giving you a PG version. This book does not use words as the correct anatomy terms for male and female genitalia. You hear the word genitalia? That's the cleanest thing I'm saying. The book is unhinged. And there's a point where you know how sheltered Kathy is, even to a point where it's like, she's beyond. And beyond sheltered, because here's some things. And then we're gonna move on. Kathy was out in public. I'm going to show you how unhinged this book is. Was out in public. This man was relieving himself in public. He sees Kathy. He turns around, still relieving himself. And this came up in the topic of her telling Francis, oh, I don't know what male genitalia is. But then she brought that up. She was like,
oh, that weird wiggly worm thingy? What? That's so gross.
It was like, girl, you have seen one. You just don't know what it is. Oh, God. Frances is so unsheltered. She was out somewhere and saw two people just out doing the tango on the street. This Victorian era place was like crazy. Like, I don't know where they were growing up, but good God. How did Frances go out and see all this stuff? This book is graphic. There's wording in it that some people today may be like, oh my God, this is too much, but it's a read. Moving on. This book is surprisingly educational for the 17th and the 21st century. I mean, Frances gives better advice than you would get in your freaking health class. Grown adults out there would probably be like, oh man, she's she's right. We're like, whoa. It is basically an educational book. The book also dives into hypocrisy when it comes to intimacy, because Frank goes on and she says, you know how people in the church are quick to condemn women for exploring themselves sexually, but not the men. And then she goes on to say, there's a part of the book, she says, you see those same people in brothels cheating on their wives. She brings so much. I feel like I don't have enough words to say. This book anyway. It talks about the double standard in women and men that still goes on today, and the that's right, hypocrisy. The hypocrisy, because it's the men that are the hypocrites, not all of them. The hypocrisy in it, because she talks about the church situation and how they go on to say, oh, you shouldn't be doing this, but they still do the same thing. Things have changed, but not have changed a lot, because this book is quite an eye-opener to how the world keeps young people in the dark about their own bodies, especially young women. I mean, Kathy had no clue what her own bodily anatomy was called. That's how clueless she was. I don't think people today take it to that extreme of not letting. Some people might. I don't know everybody in the world, but it's a baffling situation, and it still happens today, where people are so afraid to let their kids know certain things, or young people know certain things about their body, what it does, how it does it. I mean, we're still not educating girls and women properly about their periods to this day. It's 2025. Look, I'm gonna say this. For 1665, I've said that like 8,000 times in this video, 1665. This book is fun, it's educational, and it's full of gossip. It is. If you want to read it, I read it in the archives, on the Internet Archives. I can link that below if you want to read it where I did. There is a copy on Amazon, and I think it's like, hold on, let me do some research. If you look it up on Amazon, the first one is like $0. I have no clue if it's the same as it is in the archives, but the archives gives you a full understanding of it. But just don't be like Samuel Pepys, and burn it after you read it. Okay? Just don't do that. Thank you for watching. That is my video today. I hope you like and subscribe, and possibly follow me on social media, and possibly on my blog. That'll all be linked below. And if you have any more books, banned books, controversial books, it could be today's or ancient times, please let me know in the comments. I might review it and do a video on it. Or if you just want to give a thought on it, just let me know. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.